Hello, my name is Joanne Bauer, and I'm a co-founder of Rights Collab and an adjunct professor at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, where I've been teaching business and human rights for nearly 2 decades. As part of the Investor Alliance for Human Rights webinar series on the corporate responsibility to respect, I will be speaking with you about stakeholder engagement, which sits at the heart of human rights due diligence and the corporate responsibility to respect. As this audience is no doubt well aware, the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which mandates large companies to conduct due diligence on human rights and environmental impacts within their operations, supply chains, and across business relationships in order to prevent, mitigate, and address adverse impacts on human rights and the environment, is poised to significantly shift the landscape of responsible business conduct. Together with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, tens of thousands of companies will be required to conduct due diligence and to report on material impacts and how they are addressing them. While not having an effective risk management system in place has arguably always been financially material, these new directives have made HREDD, as we know it, even more so, as there are penalties as well as the possibility of civil liability for failure to comply. Therefore, investors will need to be able to discern the quality of due diligence of their portfolio companies. In other words, how robust their human rights risk management systems are. So let's take a look at how stakeholder engagement appears within the CSDDD. Article 13 of the CSDDD spells out what effective engagement with stakeholders means within the law. This slide contains the full text of Article 13, which details the expectations of companies. Engagement entails ongoing consultation with stakeholders that allows for genuine interaction and dialogue at the appropriate level, whether it be the project or site level, for example, and specifies that when consulting with stakeholders, companies must provide them with relevant and comprehensive information. The stakeholder consultation process is expected to take place throughout the life cycle of due diligence, as part of the first step to gather the necessary information, as part of the development of prevention and corrective action plans, as part of any decision related to terminating or suspending a business relationship, as part of the adoption of appropriate measures to remediate impacts, and when developing qualitative and quantitative indicators for monitoring effectiveness. Criteria for effective engagement include, for example, ensuring stakeholders are free from retaliation and retribution, paying attention to the need of vulnerable stakeholders and to overlapping vulnerabilities and intersecting factors, taking into account potentially affected groups or communities. Where meaningful stakeholder engagement is not possible or where additional perspectives are helpful, companies should consult with experts such as civil society organizations or individual organizations that are defending human rights and environment. The engagement is not intended to affect the rights of workers or their representatives under existing EU and national laws, as well as collective agreements. And I'll add that elsewhere in the directive, it states that industry or multi-stakeholder initiatives can be relied upon for consultation, so long as they are appropriate to support effective engagement and do not replace consultation with workers and their representatives. The term stakeholders can refer to two types based on whether or not they are adversely affected by projects and plans, or whether they are involved in causing the potential or actual impacts. On the one hand, there are the non-affected stakeholders, for example, managers, owners, or customers of a company, local or central governments, consultants, service providers, investors, as well as the media. And then there are affected stakeholders, which are also known as rights holders. These are typically marginalized or vulnerable groups, for whom meaningful engagement is particularly important. Often, affected stakeholders are also known as rights holders. It is this type, the affected stakeholders, that the directive contemplates. And it's important to note that marginalization of particular social or ethnic groups is often at play, and therefore also the company rights holder power disparities, both in terms of how harms occur and the dynamics of the engagement, is also often present. It's also important to note the particular risks inherent with land-based investments in relation to earning a social license to operate. In their influential 2014 study on the costs of community conflict in the extractive sector, Rachel Davis and Daniel Franks revealed significant financial impacts arising from conflicts between mining communities, mining companies, and local communities. Their research found that community opposition can cause substantial delays and additional costs, often running into the millions of dollars for companies involved. Key findings include that for operational delays, conflict can lead to delays that average nearly US $20 million per week for large mining projects, and this is primarily due to halted operations or project suspensions and disruptions. The indirect costs, even beyond direct financial losses, can come into effect in terms of longer-term value erosion, including reputational damage, loss of access to future resources, and increased security costs. And finally, there's a loss of productivity. For example, one case study revealed that lost productivity due to conflict cost nearly US $100 million over a 20-month period. Recognizing that particular sectors, for example, the mining for critical minerals, must go where geology dictates, companies must pay particular attention to the particular vulnerabilities of persons possessing specific rights or land tenure rights that may not be secured. Therefore, just as where engagement involves trade unions, it must meet international standards related to collective bargaining, and where engagement involves Indigenous people, it must meet international standards related to free, prior, and informed consent. Now, it's also important to recognize that the risks to affected people of land-based investments can contribute to a cycle of poverty, including homelessness, loss of livelihood, dismantling of production systems, food insecurity, psychological trauma, negative health impacts, loss of health, increased morbidity, increased vulnerability of women and children, economic and cultural marginalization, and social disintegration. This all leads to a cycle of poverty. It's important to also recognize that these risks to people contribute to prudential risk and a macroeconomic downturn, which manifests as systemic risk across diversified investors' total portfolios. The UNGPs and the OECD guidelines upon which the CSDDD is based conceptualizes meaningful stakeholder engagement not as something that companies do when they decide it's relevant, but as a central feature of due diligence. To quote John Ruckey, the architect of the UN Guiding Principles, human rights due diligence is not a transactional process. You are not looking to buy a piece of property and you want to make sure that there is a title to it. You are undertaking a long-term relationship with people. So the focus needs to be on those people whose lives, activities, and opportunities you can affect. That means that stakeholder engagement is absolutely critical to human rights due diligence. It's one of the distinctive features differentiating it from conventional due diligence processes. To support investors to discern the quality of human rights and environmental due diligence of their portfolio companies and improve corporate stewardship, Rights Collab is leading an initiative to develop what we're calling investor HREDD precision tools, where each tool represents a pain point and a point of leverage in HREDD. This is a collaborative initiative working with a range of partners, including notably the Investor Alliance for Human Rights and ICCR. With these tools, we are transposing the requirements of HREDD into specific corporate actions that investors can look for to know that portfolio companies are carrying out effective due diligence. One of these tools is a stakeholder engagement guide, which we are now currently developing. As a basis for the guide, one of our collaborating partners, the IRIS Foundation, identified 4 authoritative standards on stakeholder engagement. The IFC Stakeholder Engagement, a good practice handbook for companies doing business in emerging markets from 2007. Accountabilities, AA 1000 Stakeholder Engagement Standard from 2015. The OECD Due Diligence Guidance for Meaningful Stakeholder Engagement in the Extractive Sector in 2017. And the most recent standard, the TNFD Guidance on Engagement with Indigenous Peoples, Local Communities, and Affected Stakeholders from 2023. These guidance documents together emphasize engagement largely in relation to land-based investments, a little bit less so to worker rights. Recognizing this, we supplemented these guides, group of guides with ILO guidance. While the ILO doesn't have a single comprehensive document dedicated solely to stakeholder engagement, its various conventions, recommendations, and guidelines, including the ILO Tripartite Declaration of Principles Concerning Multinational Enterprises and Social Policy, otherwise known as the MNE Declaration, contain insights on how companies and governments should engage with stakeholders, especially workers and local communities. The IRIS Foundation mapped the insights across the 4 standards and the ILO documents, and together we organized them into 4 pillars, with each pillar containing 1 or 2 of what we're calling effectiveness criteria for stakeholder engagement. So the first pillar is embedded in management systems. And this effectiveness criteria is ensuring that there's an embedded commitment. The company needs to have a clear public commitment to ongoing stakeholder engagement for their entire value chain. Embed that in the governance, culture, and leadership. The second pillar is identifying and prioritizing stakeholders. This needs to include inclusive stakeholder mapping and identification by ensuring that it's listening to a full range of rights holders across the value chain, and that it has a process in place to identify the legitimate representatives of rights holders. The second effectiveness criteria under this pillar is assessing salient stakeholders. So there's the importance of prioritizing stakeholder engagements where its operations have the potential to cause most harm, and those with the greatest potential to have an impact upon their business. The third pillar is conducting appropriate activities, and this includes effectiveness criteria on ensuring informed participation, where the company fully communicates the stakeholder process with rights holders, with inputs from rights holders, and taking into account the context. The second effectiveness criteria under this pillar is establishing trust and accountability, which requires establishing procedures and principles to build rights holders' trust and accountability for the company's actions. The fourth pillar is ensuring follow-through. The company needs to have in place a stakeholder-informed action plan where it analyzes the information obtained through stakeholder engagement and formulates a detailed action plan that clearly shows it is rights holder informed. And finally, monitoring and continuous improvement. The company must show that it is monitoring and striving for continuous improvement by establishing and maintaining a robust stakeholder engagement, monitoring and evaluation system that's transparent and includes regular review by rights holders and independent parties. In the guide, and this is a screenshot of the prototype that we are developing, we include several elements. What this means, why this matters, and here we draw on fieldwork conducted in Latin America by our Brazil-based partner, ESG Inteligente, what investors can look for, and specific engagement questions. Like other tools in the tool set, we have now certifications, red flags in the beta version, and the responsible contracting guide, which was created by our partners ICCR and the Responsible Contracting Project at Rutgers Law Schools. All tools have the following characteristics: that they were created for investors and with investors, a focus on financial and materiality, they are collaborative, open resource, trusted, research-based, validated by experts, and by bringing them all together to one site, providing a one-stop shop on HREDD tools. As mentioned, the stakeholder engagement guide itself will also contain the elements and explain what each element means, why investors should care, and what to look for. And we intend to provide a set of an entry point, or what we're calling gateways, that will be developed according to a kind of risk register, from everyday stakeholder engagement monitoring to stakeholder engagement in high-risk situations. And when you enter into these gateways, you will come to various scenarios to know you're in the right place. And from there, we will go into detail about what those effectiveness criteria might be that would be maybe a little bit different from one gateway to another gateway. We also intend that there will be a just transition angle to some of those scenarios, knowing how important that is. As noted, there will be an engagement script that will include questions and frequent feedback, guidance for direct investor and stakeholder engagement, which will be particularly important, especially in those high-risk situations. And we are looking into providing tailored guidance for private equity, GPs, LPs, and VCs, and also being able to produce this in multiple languages. Before closing, I'd like to share another resource to help with meaningful stakeholder engagement. In response to the private sector's need to rapidly improve their human rights and environmental due diligence, Namati, Just Grant, Rights Collab, and the Grassroots Justice Network have conducted research on the barriers businesses and communities face when engaging over land-based investments. And we've created a brief that appears here, which presents the case for establishing a pooled fund as a mechanism for market actors, business and public and private finance, to provide legal and technical support to communities while maintaining the independence of grassroots support providers. You can find all that here at the QR code, which will take you to Rights Collab's website. Please consider collaborating with us on the HRED toolset. There are several ways to do so. You can join us in as many as the partners have that appear here in co-designing a tool. You can join a beta testing session to test our prototype and provide feedback on the use case. You can join a learning and feedback session on the beta version of the tool when it comes out. These opportunities will be announced via LinkedIn, so follow Rights Collab on LinkedIn or use this QR code to access the Collaborate page of the website where the opportunities will be posted. Thank you for your attention and for the critically important work you are doing to ensure the corporate responsibility to respect human rights.